you've been following this lately, but on social media, you see these debates about whether or not technology should be banned in the classroom. Sometimes you found mobile phones in the classroom to be both a blessing and a curse. There's times when you just want your students to have access to the outside world, but there are other times when you just want students to be fully engaged in the classroom without distracting technology. This is where our sponsor Flipped comes in. Flipped is a first ever classroom engagement application that keeps students from getting distracted by their mobile phones while they're learning, and it does it in a really clever way. Some instructors have even reported that Flipped has been associated with increased grades and reduction in attrition. If you're interested in learning more about Flipped, please visit flipped.co/psych. That's FLIPDAPP.co/psych. Hello, and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 71, where Garth had the opportunity to interview Linda Woolf from Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri, along with guest host Sue Frantz. Now, before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and my favorite moments. So I have to tell you, the really fun part about having the guest host is that you get to hear the interplay between Sue and Linda. When Garth and I kind of record our own little podcast from time to time and post it, or when we're riffing together with a guest, when we have that opportunity, you kind of hear that between us. And so I really loved hearing that between Linda and Sue. It didn't happen all that often, but kind of as they got more comfortable during the interview, it happened more and more towards the end. And so it's just that piece of listening to friends talking and happening to record it for a podcast. It's just a delightful part of this thing that Garth and I get to do for Psych Sessions. And so I really do hope that you enjoyed listening in on these two friends kind of riff back and forth and talk about the times they've roomed together, or, talk about each other's experiences, and having Sue discover new things about one of her best friends that, she was just delighted to hear about and tell stories, and, and get Linda to tell a story that, maybe she had forgotten an aspect of or wasn't planning on telling. I know I've done that to Garth or to Regan or to other people on the podcast so many times. And so it was just so much fun. As psychologists, I think we all understand this, but sometimes examples just come directly to top of mind. The impact that our parents have on our future development, even into adulthood, things that Linda's father said to her about Linda's future were just, I'm going to use the word staggering. I'm not going to give you the quote. I want you to listen to the episode. But I think Sue had some really poignant things to say about, when your father says these things to you about your future, Linda, do you think that he meant those about your mother? And so it's really interesting to listen to. And I just kind of liked the ability to listen in on this really important and meaningful and personal conversation. I appreciate Linda sharing all of that. Linda talked about, the backstory, as we often do. I think it was helpful to have since Sue knew some of that, she kind of facilitated that. Growing up in the Midwest in Ohio, making her way to Webster College, which later becomes Webster University. Really, Linda is quite literally grounded in St. Louis, although she does range off and do some political work and takes a stint in bartending, which actually kind of solidifies her motivation. I've got to go to graduate school because I don't want to keep doing that. I'll let her tell that story in her own words. I loved hearing about, the startup and really, as I listened, I thought about, so many things in my start of my career are parallel to Linda's. And so I really found a lot of relatables with regard to the timeline, the startup, even some of the things like salary and, graduate school experiences. And so it was really delightful to listen to. I loved her advice about confronting the things that you are fearful of doing, that oftentimes the things you're afraid to do might be the things that you need to do the most. And for an introvert, the things that she had to overcome if she wanted to tell the stories that she wanted to tell. And so she obviously over her career, or maybe from the beginning of age, 5 or 6, with the love of reading, became a social justice advocate. She became a national or international expert in genocide and Holocaust and social justice. But if you want to be an effective advocate, you have to be public. You have to give talks and write books and book chapters and publish journal articles. And Linda talked about, if she had the chance, she might just prefer just to stay home and teach online classes and not get out of the house. But she overcame those things that made her somewhat uncomfortable. And that was some of the advice that she offered, not just to junior faculty, but to all faculty. I really appreciated that. We all have to find those things. We ask our students to do that all the time, but sometimes I think faculty members forget about that. There's so many things. I can't really summarize all of them. I want you to enjoy the episode. I, of course, enjoyed the homage to Jane Hallinan. All hail Jane Hallinan, of course, as always. At the end of the episode, you're going to enjoy the back and forth about roommate techniques between Linda and Sue. It was lovely. And Sue's recent discovery of why, when they bunk together in a hotel room at a convention or AP reading, in the 2 beds in the room, why Sue always gets the bed that she gets. There is a reason. There is a rationale. Keep listening to the very end of the episode. And finally, in classic Linda Woolf fashion, she turns the end of the episode and puts the spotlight on someone else, and she makes Garth tell a story about something he's involved in that's worth listening to. So I sincerely hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did.
Well, I am at the AP reading. It's June 2019, and I'm so happy to sit down here with Linda M. Woolf from Webster University. She's wearing the sweatshirt, so that really is helpful. And for the first time on the Psych Sessions podcast, I have invited a co-host for the interview. And so, Sue Frantz, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. And you know what? It is Susan M. Frantz.
Susan M. You guys both have M's.
We do.
So what does the M stand for?
Marie. No.
What do you know? It's Linda Marie. Yes.
Are you kidding?
Not kidding.
We've never known that. Mm-mm.
How long have you guys been rooming together, friends together?
We probably started knowing each other in, I'm going to guess, 1994. It was the TIPS listserv. That was the year.
Sounds about right.
I think 94 was the year the TIPS listserv started. And we just started, we were just part of this, it was a listserv. It was this huge, I don't even know how many people were on it, but it was quite the huge community. It was an unmoderated listserv for teaching of psychology.
That's a quarter of a century.
Well, let's not think about it that way.
Wow.
But you haven't matured at all.
Nor have you.
I know. How did that happen?
I don't know, but everyone's about to see this.
Yes.
Or hear this.
Yeah.
And that's all right.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's all right or not. I got to think about that.
Well, the Maries, the middle Maries, no? Yeah?
My mother only called me Susan Marie when I was in trouble.
Yeah?
And nobody knows me as Susan.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I forgot about that part. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you flip that M around, I'm a W, so sort of in the club.
Well, then it's a whole male-female thing.
Yeah. Well done. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, Wesley.
Wesley. Garth Wesley.
Yeah.
Methodist?
Never liked it. No, but, I don't think my parents put a lot of thought into anything when it came to names.
Wesley Crusher? No, you were
Wesley... I don't know.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to say Snipes when I said that, but it's, no, it doesn't
before
work.
Star Trek Next Generation with Wesley Crusher.
That's right, but I was never a Star Trek fan.
Yeah?
Yeah. I know people. Some people are. They look at me like I'm missing out on something. But when the Next Generation was on when I was growing up, I could not hang with what was going on there at all. But
I'm a Trekker.
really,
Yes,
all of it.
Absolutely.
What was the first? Was the first just original Star Trek?
The original Star Trek, which showed a much better world. And you had places like, things like Nichelle Nichols, an African-American woman who was on the bridge as an officer. Granted, she was the telephone receptionist, but she was still on the bridge, and there were women in roles doing all kinds of cool things.
What year are we talking?
That would have been in the late 60s.
Did that, at that point in time, were these thoughts coming to your head? That there are women in positions of power in this show?
Well, I think there was that, but also people being kind to each other. Mm-hmm. And they weren't going after monetary gain, but making the world a better place. The women who made a difference in my life would have been Elizabeth Holtzman and Barbara Jordan, who were in the Watergate hearings. Those were the first women that I saw who were doing something beyond, working as secretaries or teachers or perhaps nurses, but usually I was told they were just waiting to get married.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm a younger person and also from Canada. So can you tell me about those women and Watergate?
Barbara Jordan and Elizabeth Holtzman were both attorneys, and they were in the House of Representatives. So they were elected to office. Probably the most memorable would have been Barbara Jordan, who was an African-American woman who was a constitutional lawyer, and just amazing. She just would interview these people, who were facing charges under Watergate. And she could just rip them to shreds. She was just brilliant in knowing the law. And my guess is she could have been the first woman or African-American on the Supreme Court, except she developed MS, which cut short her career. They didn't have the treatments then that they have now, but she was brilliant.
Yeah, so that struck you from that.
Oh,
age.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was told, you go on to school, and if you go on to school, it's to get married. And in the words of my father, you'll probably just be nothing but a dumb housewife. But that was the generation I grew up in.
What generation was that? What were your years?
I'm a baby boomer.
Okay.
I'm a baby boomer, so my mother's generation would have been far more restrictive.
Yeah.
But, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and we talked about, calling our parents when we got admitted to graduate school. And my parents weren't all that pleased, but her mother burst into tears when she heard she was going to graduate school. So it wasn't one of those things where you were congratulated. It was seen as almost a failure that you were sort of choosing a career path over what you were supposed to naturally do.
Become a dumb housewife.
Yes.
Did that reflect your father's attitude toward your mother?
He grew up in a time where, very misogynistic time. I think he was probably better than a lot of men at the time. But I remember he told the story of my grandmother. When she got married, she had gotten a scholarship to go to college in art. And her husband, Fred, who she was dating at the time, told her, if you go to college, that's it. And so she gave up college to become a farmer's wife at the time. I always tell my students, if you want to get a sense of what that era was like, there's an episode of Father Knows Best that you can find on YouTube called Betty the Engineer. And it's career days at her high school, and they got to pick who they would shadow, and she picked somebody who was an engineer. She was going to shadow that person. And they gave her such a hard time that she, of course, ended up running home in tears, and then putting on the dress her mother had bought her and dating the person who told her she couldn't be an engineer. But it was so reflective of those times that, no, this is not something that you did. And so we have come such a long way. But if you look at things such as IT, there's still such a bias against women. It's not across the board. It is in specific fields that we see those biases still.
Were you expected to go to college?
it was always expected to go to college, but I don't know that they expected me to do anything with it.
So you were supposed to get the MRS degree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That did not work out so well.
No.
That did not work out so well.
No, it didn't. I'm sure you were a big disappointment.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
So Cincinnati Reds fan.
Okay.
Still love baseball. Baseball Cardinals, so much better than the Pittsburgh Pirates. You know.
There are Pirates fans in the room who grew up in Western Pennsylvania.
What can I say?
Are the Reds and the Pirates a rivalry?
Not really. It's,
Okay.
It's I don't know who the Reds would be, rivals with, but certainly Cardinals and the Cubs.
Cardinals and the Cubs.
Cardinals and Cubs, and I believe we just swept them last weekend. But
Oh.
Just
I'm sure they'd love to remind you that they've just did something pretty important a couple
Yeah.
years ago. I
well,
don't know.
occasionally they'll tell me, we won the World Series, we've gone to the playoffs, and then I always say you've won 2, and St. Louis has won 11.
Yeah, well
So
done.
until you get those other 9, there really isn't a conversation to be had about it.
The Pirates won in '79.
Oh, okay, that's quaint.
So you...
But I would tell students, because students are often amazed when they hear faculty have interests beyond your scholarship, that it is so important to have those interests, whether it's, sports or running or family or whatever, to build a life around. Because if all you do is study, which they often feel compelled to do, they burn out so quickly, and they don't do as well. So you have to have...
Have sports
that
always
balance.
been an outlet for you?
Anything outside the home was really an outlet for me.
What does that mean?
I didn't, my family was the kind of family where you watched TV during the meals. You didn't have a lot of conversations. And so, it wasn't the, I'm sure my brother, if he ever listens to this podcast, in which case I'm sorry, Billy, and he would hate that I call him Billy. And I'm sure his experience was very different than mine, but it wasn't a warm household. And so for me, school, the library, this was a time and age when you were in late grade school, junior high, or high school. You could just get on your bike in the morning, go to the library, go to a park, and then they would see you when you came home after dark. That was, there wasn't this, you need to know where somebody is all the time, and someone needs to be. And so I just spent tons of times in the library, just sitting and reading books and bringing them home. And
So from
it was
what
my
age?
world.
What age did you like? It sounds like you loved reading. What age did you start to love reading?
As soon as that little booklet came home where you could get, I think they were called the Scholastic books.
They still exist. My daughter
And you
gets
could
them.
order
Yeah.
them. And it was one of the things, my mother, if I asked for books, she would get them for me. And so I would just look through the list, and you're supposed to pick out 1 or 2. I'd always have this long laundry list of books. And so that's from grade school on. Mm-hmm. And I can remember even being in 2nd grade and being invited back to 1st grade with Mrs. Radcliffe. And she had me read to the 1st graders, It was such a cool experience. So, yeah, right from the beginning.
That's interesting that you remember her by name. I don't remember a lot of my teachers by name, but was there anything about her that...
That was my place to feel valued and worthwhile and have a future. And I think teachers tend to like bright, inquisitive kids.
I love that you were 7 years old when you discovered the power of teaching.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely follow that thread back. Right?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
But you hadn't thought about that.
I had not.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but it's true. But it's just the value of education and the worlds it opens up. So even if I'm under the covers with my flashlight, reading books, I was transported to different places and different worlds and different opportunities. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So I have to ask, do you still read with a flashlight under the covers?
No, I don't. I actually can turn the light on. The dogs look at me like, what are you doing? You know, we're trying to sleep here. But no, I can read whenever I want, which is sort of great.
Okay, I didn't know how much consideration you had for your dogs.
None.
Okay.
No. No, actually, they allow me to share their house.
What was this model? Was reading modeled for you, or education modeled for you in your home, or were you just kind of inquisitive? You're just curious kid.
It's interesting because no, I don't think it was. I remember my mother occasionally reading books, but not driven to read the way I was.
And it sounds like you were
and of
not
course,
the
she was also taking care of a house and supporting my father and doing all those things that a good housewife should do.
Well, a dumb housewife wouldn't read books, Garth.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think he probably meant that long term, but it's one of those things that slipped out that gives the sense of, you know, we're women's place, we're in the world.
Yeah, you can't get out of childhood forgetting that.
Yeah.
But you weren't there are some kids who kind of like books. You're beyond average, right? Like,
right.
As far as your love for books at that age through school. So, nonfiction, fiction, everything like.
When I was a kid, it was mostly fiction.
Okay.
Yeah, and now it's mostly nonfiction. And when I read fiction, it's not something intellectually challenging. I like fun little mystery novels with humor in them, or sci-fi books. I like reading science fiction.
Okay, so I think we need book recommendations real quick from you. Some good sci-fi. People are like, because somebody like me, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to find good mystery books or sci-fi books. So, any favorite authors?
Well, Arthur Clarke, Isaac Asimov, those are the classics.
Those are the serious ones. Now, what do you do for fun?
I'm trying to remember the names of the authors. Isn't that terrible?
She'll get you a list. She'll get you a list.
Yeah, I can get you a list. But also sometimes some of the women authors, like Octavia Butler.
Classics.
Yeah, they are.
This isn't the fluffy mysteries.
Yeah, I remember talking to somebody and they said they struggle with Jurassic Park because of the really technical parts. And I thought, the technical parts? So perhaps my bar is a little different than some other people's. I can recognize that. Yeah.
This is a weird question, but we're at the AP reading, and you have been here for how many years reading?
I don't know the number. Sue would probably know better than I would. I know it by city. So my first city was Daytona.
Which was our last year in Daytona, and we just checked the T-shirt with Dave Thomas.
Yeah.
And 2006, we believe, was the last year in Daytona.
Okay. So that would have been my first year.
14 years, whatever.
Yeah.
But have you been a reader that whole time?
I have been a reader that whole time. I've been invited to be a table leader twice and sent it back saying, no, thank you. I just want to be a reader.
Does that relate to your love of reading, or what is that?
I think it relates to, there's a couple things. One, I like the service component of just reading and giving back. And the second is there's a lot of high school teachers for whom this is a really important professional development opportunity. And for me to take that away from somebody, and that's slot, I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Makes us look bad.
It does make you look bad, but what can I say?
Yeah.
That's just my...
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
She's quietly judging us over there.
Not quietly.
Not
That
quietly.
seemed to be very
Just
verbal.
just outright judging us.
No, that's really that's really cool. It seems like a lot of people are vying for that position, and so I mean, especially in the room, people want to climb to those positions of. I don't think it's power, but it's not power at all.
No, it's not power. There's no power.
There's zero power.
There is zero power.
But I mean, it's nice to status. Thank you.
Responsibility.
Yeah,
Responsibility.
Responsibility.
Just difference. I mean, after you've been at it for a while, but you're a person who has turned it down. I think that's really just interesting.
Well, I also have achieved in other areas, so it isn't as if,
Yes, you have.
I'm missing a line on my curriculum vitae that people are going to look at and go, oh, yes, she's valuable. We need to keep her here at Webster.
She's made it.
She has made it. Society for the Teaching of Psychology gave Linda an award many years ago.
Oh, 1988.
Early Career Award, as I recall.
Absolutely. I got an early career award. Yep.
In 88.
Yeah, and I remember I was broke as all get out, and so I took a Greyhound bus down to the convention, and fortunately the awards was in, the hotel hospitality suite, because I couldn't afford to go to the APA convention, and so I got my plaque, and I don't remember where I stayed, but then I took a Greyhound back home, but it was an honor.
Where was the convention? What city?
It was in Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And were you in St. Louis at the time?
Yes.
You were already at Webster, or no?
Yeah, I was. I was at Webster. I started there adjunct in 1986, and sometimes people worry about getting in that adjunct track that you never leave it. And my piece of advice is you teach things that no one else wants to teach. And at the time, no one was really vying to teach statistics, and yet there was a huge need. And they were working to expand their gerontology program and psychology of aging, and so I did my dissertation on that. And so I worked to create a job at Webster. So when I graduated from St. Louis University in '88, they then converted it to a full-time position.
Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew up in Ohio. You go to high school in Ohio?
Yes.
And then...
Walnut Hills High School in Cincinnati.
And do you, at that point, do you know you're definitely going to college when you're in high school?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I tried to pick a college that was as far away from home as I could get.
Oh.
Because my brother went to... He went to one school that was not that far away, and then there was one that was in Cincinnati. I don't remember where he graduated from. But I wanted to get away from home and explore my opportunities. So I went to a little place called Webster College.
No way.
Absolutely. Webster College. And I bet you can't guess my major. Now, you may know.
I may
Hold
know.
on, let
You
me
may know,
guess.
so
I
you
may
don't
know.
get to guess.
I'm not guessing.
I didn't start in psychology. I started in something else.
No, I'm going to say that you started in, like literature or something like that.
No, that would be incorrect. I started as a theater major.
No way.
Yeah,
You were in the
absolutely.
ballpark. You were not that far away with literature.
Okay.
Because
wasn't that
I
far
could
away.
Yeah.
go and be somebody else in different places. And so in high school, I got involved in drama and being in plays and putting on different personas. And then when I went to college, it was like, no, this is not a career path.
Okay, but
per se.
Webster College is...
Webster College is in St. Louis. It's
Oh.
now Webster University.
Okay.
It is now Webster University.
Got it.
And it was run by, in the 60s or earlier, by the Sisters of Loretto. And a radical group of nuns, they marched at Selma.
Whoa.
And some of them were arrested at the School of Americas. They were always interested in doing all these innovative things. And they brought the Hiltons in and created the Loretto Hilton Theater.
Wait a minute. The Hiltons?
The Hiltons, as in the hotel
that we are in.
chain.
That we are in right now.
Absolutely. So the
It all
Hiltons,
comes around.
Hiltons
It all comes
partnered with Webster College at the time to create the professional repertory theater in St. Louis. They put together what was called the College School, which was an experimental school that went up through, grade school, and they did all these innovative things and ran it into bankruptcy. And so they had to sell it, and it became then a nonprofit, but not affiliated with the sisters anymore. But I knew once I got there, I wanted to come back and teach there because of the focus on social justice and human rights and people making a difference in the world, and that tradition still stays at the university.
So did that exist in you before you were there, or did it just get awakened in you while you were there?
I think it existed before I got there, and I think a lot of times when individuals are growing up and they experience hardship, whatever that hardship may be, they develop a sensitivity to, this is not right,
Yeah.
And then wanting to make a difference somehow.
Now, here's something that I've never put together. So I did know about the theater major. And I know what you went on to get your PhD. Now, did you get a bachelor's degree in theater?
No. After my freshman year of college, I need to switch majors. And so I switched. My roommate said, you should take an intro psych class. And so I did, and I got hooked. And it was Intro Psych 1 and Intro Psych 2. I took Intro Psych 1, and then I took about 60 hours of psychology, including creating some reading courses. I was getting ready to graduate, and they said, you don't have Intro Psych 2, and it's a requirement. So I had to go back and take the second half of intro after I'd had a gazillion courses in psychology, and I'm sure I drove the professor crazy. Because he would have multiple choice questions, and I would then, if I got it wrong, I would critique it and then give him background about why each of those answers was correct, and it really should have been none of the above. But yeah, I graduated.
All right, so a couple things. One, your next task is to guess what her PhD is in, which area of psychology. I will grant you that it's an area of psychology.
Well, you should ask about the master's first. That's further off, because I just gave a hint a minute ago about what the doctor was probably
All right,
in.
so we're going to see if you're paying attention.
Hold on. First of all, I'm not gonna be made to look a fool 3 times, just maybe twice. On the,
Okay, twice.
okay.
Fair. Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
But my question is, when you took that first intro class, what was it that hooked you?
I think it was the idea that there's all these questions and here's some possible answers, but we don't know. And so we keep studying more. And so you just have to keep learning to figure things out.
I wonder if it's the story that draws you into psychology, because it sounds like a story of not knowing. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I loved those Choose Your Adventure stories. You know, do you remember those
yes.
books?
Yeah.
Where you never knew where your next decision would lead you. But I kind of hear some of that.
I think that's what psychology is about. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything.
Yeah.
And there's just all these variables, but you can look and see it in the world, and it can be anywhere from how you're dealing with your dogs and cat at home to what's happening in politics in the world and international relations. So it just applies to everything.
So you get your psych major, and at that point, you get your psych degree. You're a psych major, you get your psych degree. What are you thinking is next? At what point do you realize that you want to go to graduate school?
I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I applied to graduate school, but I was burnt out. So I got accepted to graduate school and decided not to go. I wrote him a letter saying, thanks, I've changed my mind. Which I'm sure there was somebody who got that slot who was thrilled. You know, that, somebody backed out at the last minute. I took 3 years off. 2 years I worked for a political organization. And then 1 year, you'll probably never guess what I did. I don't know that you know this.
I don't know this.
Humane Society.
Nope.
Oh, that was a really good guess.
It's a good guess, but it's too painful. I walk in there and I just burst into tears looking at those dogs. Yeah,
and
that's
she
just
picked
too
them all
painful.
home, and then
Yeah,
there wouldn't be any...
good. I'd be on the hoarders.
I felt like I
and-
might have
yeah.
got it right there.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
no.
was really good. That was
No,
really
but
good.
usually if your first instinct is probably going to be wrong.
Okay.
No, I attended bar for a year.
I did not know that.
And it was the bartending for a year that made, about a month into it, I said, I got to go to graduate school. So I can remember sitting in the bar when it got quiet, on a Thursday evening or something, filling out my graduate school applications. Yeah.
So that tells you she did not go to graduate school in counseling or clinical.
That's right.
That is true.
That's true. Okay,
That is
thanks. You're narrowing it down for me, so that's good. By the way, what city, after you finished in St. Louis at Webster, did you stay in?
I did stay in St.
Okay.
Louis. I went to St. Louis University.
Okay, but even when your bartending gig was in St. Louis?
Yes.
Okay, so you were there. All right.
The political job moved me around the country to a variety of different places.
Okay. What did you do for that job? What was your...
It was with Acorn, which kind of got a bad things happen. They were set up. But low and moderate organizing sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So you apply to graduate school for your master's program at Webster.
No, not at Webster.
Not at Webster.
St. Louis University.
St. Louis University.
St. Louis.
Yep.
Keep up, Garth.
Keep up, Garth.
Come on.
Have more of that.
Yeah. For the listener, for the reader, I almost said, for the listener, it's been a long day at the AP reading.
It has been a long day.
So we may or may not be having some beverages during this interview.
We may or may not.
Yeah, that's
okay.
quite possible.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so St. Louis University.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You applied to a graduate program there.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
In what?
And I got accepted, and I got a teaching assistantship, all the whistles and bells,
What area was that?
in physiological psychology. So my master's thesis was on the effects of lateral habenular lesions on a variety of behaviors, including predatory aggression in rats.
I knew you were going to guess that.
You know, it was my second guess. My first guess was social.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, but what you just said, that was exactly my second guess.
Yeah.
How did you become interested in that? I don't hear that yet in your...
I like the science.
Okay.
I just like the science. And I'm not a huge people person, so it, was an area of psych where, I thought I could get a job and make a difference. But I discovered after a period of time that I couldn't do the animal research. It was just too difficult for me. Because you do surgery on the rats' brains, and then you have to verify where the lesions are. So you have to sacrifice the rats and slice up the brain slices and do all that. And I just couldn't do it anymore.
How early on did you know you couldn't do it? Did you finish the program?
I finished my master's, but I had some help from a friend with the finals, because you work with these rats for weeks and they're numbered, but you find yourself, and I didn't give them names, but there was one that was rather heavy, and it was sort of the lumpy one, and you just start to make these connections, and it was difficult. And so it's one of those things I look back and struggle with, because I'm the kind of person where if a spider gets into my house or, some sort of gnat or something, I take it outside.
Yeah.
And there are places where I just let in the basement. The spiders can live there as comfortably as they want, and so I struggle with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I struggle with that. In my house,
Me
we
too.
have this ant problem, and I don't even know what to do about it because it's hard.
Yeah,
It's
you
hard
have to find out where they get in, and you have to plug up those areas.
I know.
And I just say, guys, I am so sorry, but you can't live here. You can live anywhere else, but it cannot be here. I'm sorry.
This could very quickly turn into a bourbon-induced cry fest over insects.
It totally can.
Although I draw the line at cockroaches
Okay.
and ticks.
And
So-
ticks.
Yeah, ticks.
Yeah, there is a line, isn't there?
There is a line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you finish your master's degree and PhD, your program, statistics related.
No, it was
No.
actually in aging. It was developmental
Oh, okay.
psych and aging, because gerontology was a growing field. And again, I knew that's something that could translate into a position. But my dissertation dealt with ageism, so it was a very social psych sort of topic.
So I was kind of right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
And developmental psych, I'll go on the record as saying this, developmental psych is my least favorite. It does absolutely nothing for me, but I do tell my students that some of my best friends are developmental psychologists.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although I claim more that I'm a peace psychologist.
Oh, I totally...
Now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally own... I don't
Yeah.
own that. You own that.
Yeah.
So how do you... Let's get to the peace psychology thing eventually, but you do your PhD in developmental psych, essentially.
Right.
And...
But it was a broad experimental program.
Okay.
So my doctorate and master's were in really, applied experimental psychology, which at St. Louis University included social and developmental and physio. So it was sort of the same umbrella program. And depending on what your area was, you took a few extra specialized courses in that area, and that's what your dissertation or your master's thesis was. But the statistics and, the core courses were the same across the breadth of the discipline.
And
So-
ageism... Oh, go ahead.
So experimental and aging, so you randomly assign people to age? Or
No,
not?
it's quasi-experimental design, and I
No.
did take a course in quasi-experimental design.
Well, that's a little disappointing. I thought we were going to go right back to Star Trek.
Yeah.
Ageism. That's an interesting topic. I see the kind of the social justice side
Right.
of that. Is that what it was for you?
Absolutely.
Can you trace it back to anything else? Had you ever seen ageism that it bothered you?
I don't know whether it was so much seeing ageism that bothered me. I just knew that older adults were sort of a marginalized population in the United States. We tend to value people based on what they contribute, what they earn, and those sorts of things. And children, they don't make any money and they're just a drain on the economy. And older adults are often perceived that way as, they're not working or taking Social Security, we're going to be in trouble in years with that. Again, all that health care cost. The difference is children are seen as an investment in the future, whereas older adults, not as much. And there are families who become very concerned that this person's living too long. Here's my inheritance going. So we do have an issue of not valuing older adults in the United States. And we compare that to some Asian countries where not only is there just more intergenerational relationships and care for family in general, but a respect that goes with being an elder. And we see that in some Native American communities as well. We see it in a lot of communities. We just don't tend to see it in sort of mainstream U.S.
So what particularly did you look at in your dissertation?
I did a study where it was attitudes towards aging, and I had college men and women evaluate older and younger men and women with a series of questionnaires. And then I also went to senior centers and different places where seniors would, not nursing homes, but where older adults would go, and gave them the same sets of questionnaires. And what was interesting is that for the most part, younger men and older men, they were just sort of across the board. There wasn't a huge amount of ageism. Older women were the most accepting of individuals who were older. It was younger women where you saw the spike in bias against older adults, particularly bias against older women. And that's that whole generational thing of if you're a woman somehow getting older, you're losing your fertility, you're losing your looks, and those are the sorts of things that are valued about who you are in a culture. So I remember a student saying to me, I handed her the questionnaire and she looked at me and she was like, I hope I never reach 80. I want to die well before then. And it's just ingrained that youth is so important, but particularly for women.
Wow. That's crazy.
I know.
Okay.
I would actually be interesting as one of those things that you say, maybe someday when I have a little spare time, I'll repeat the study. Because I still have all the boxes of the questionnaires up in my attic, probably just waiting to catch fire at some point. But they're all up in the attic. So if I really wanted to, I could then do, a 30-year, analysis of differences over time.
Yeah, you should do it.
Or I should find a graduate student.
You should find a graduate student to do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or an undergraduate for their senior thesis.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I want to do it. You want to do it?
We'll help you.
Okay.
Yes.
That'll work.
She'll be second. I'll be third.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That'll work. As long as I'm first.
Yeah, no problem there.
Doesn't help us.
No, no.
So you get your PhD and then you get a
I was already
professor?
teaching. I was teaching adjunct at Webster.
Okay.
6 classes
that's
a
right.
semester.
6?
6.
3 credit classes?
3 credit, and that's what convinced them to convert it into a full-time position. I don't know with the economy and education today whether that would happen as much, but it certainly worked out well for me.
Do you remember what you were getting paid as an adjunct?
I don't remember
per
what I was
class?
paid as an adjunct, but I can tell you what my first year pay was with a doctorate, full-time, $19,000.
Hey, that's what you make, Garth.
That's what I made for years. A long time.
No.
It hasn't changed that much.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it wasn't that bad. It just wasn't changing. For
No,
a
it
long
was not
time.
changing. It was not changing.
I think
Sorry about that,
adjunct,
man.
That's all right.
it was probably something like $1,200 per class, maybe $1,100 per
Yeah.
class. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that scale sounds about right. 19 too. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've been there now for a long time.
30 plus years.
Wow. What's
Yeah.
changed? What are the big things that stand out to you?
We have a brand new science building. A brand new science building. It is just wonderful. And psychology's in the interdisciplinary science building. What
So,
more can you ask for?
Are you the Department of Psychology?
Am I the department? Well, there's
No,
8
no.
of us.
I mean, no. Is the Department of Psychology at
Let
Webster
me acknowledge
University?
I do have colleagues in my department, and they're very important, and they're just wonderful colleagues.
It's perfect. We'll edit that to the top of the episode.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah.
I work with the best people ever. I really do.
That's cool. That's cool. But are you guys like the Department of Psychological Science? The
Department of Psychology.
Department of Psychology.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I started, it was Department of Behavioral and Social Sciences, and through the years we had anthropology, sociology, women's studies, multicultural studies, legal studies, counseling. I'm probably forgetting something. And then we all just managed, psych was big enough. We splintered off.
Why is it important that with this new science building that psychology is in that physical location?
Because I think even at most universities, people outside of the discipline tend to still see psychology as somehow Freud and not empirically based and common sense, general knowledge, something that, is not of particular value to anything. And by having that recognition that, no, we are an empirical science and we've got biological science right on the same floor, because there is such a close connection between the disciplines, I think it's just sort of a mental thing with universities to say, no, this is not just, and I don't want to say just a humanity, because the humanities are important, but I think there's a difference between what science has to offer and what philosophy has to offer. Philosophy has a lot to offer. Certainly psychology's roots are partially in philosophy, but it's a different approach to things.
So if you could go back in time, speaking science fiction,
Mm-hmm.
if you can go back to your late 1980s self,
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you give to you as a new faculty member?
As a new faculty member, well, that's a tough question. Until you have tenure, keep your head down, and take the advice of more senior colleagues in terms of research or service, and recognize that every university is unique. So some are going to have a different percentage assigned to things. But also, I would say, if you're afraid of doing things, those may be the things you need to do. Mm. I think that's something I learned later because oftentimes it was my own fears that kept me from stepping out and getting involved in things or meeting people or whatever, and learning to sort of walk through that fear and just put it aside and do those things that I didn't think I was capable of doing, or was just scared of doing, and doing them anyway, because I think that's opened a lot of doors.
What were some of those things that you were that you weren't real confident about, but you just put it out there?
It's interesting because my departmental chair early on, and William Huddleston Berry, he was sort of mom, dad, departmental chair, and he'd been chair for 30 years. And he died of lung cancer, so another piece of advice, quit smoking if you smoke, because that's what killed him. He was a runner, really good health, and it was cigarettes that killed him. He always used to joke that if we'd had online education, I never would have left my house, because I am a huge introvert. And so just leaving my house to teach, to go to conferences, to do interviews like this one, it's not the easiest thing for me to do. But if I want to make a difference in different areas, whether it's within APA or in my university, you have to step outside your immediate comfort zone and just do it.
Well, especially, and this is where I'm going to turn things over, I think, to Sue a little bit, because especially from what I know of you, with your passion for social justice, and I don't know if there is an area of psychology called social justice psych, but, I just know that you have these passions that if you don't use that voice and your expertise and your knowledge, and you don't communicate that, and I've seen you give a talk, if that talk doesn't get given, people don't start thinking about these things. And so I think that's what you're giving voice to.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell us, like, over your career, what are these things that are, like, that you feel very passionate about now in your career or over your career, things that you've learned, because you've been at it for a while, and and you're wired a certain way, and so what are those things that what do you love to give a talk on? Maybe we'll start there. Human rights.
Human rights. And that has sort of fingers that feed out into different areas. So issues of war and peace, terrorism, genocide, those sorts of things. Ethics in research. I mean, for me, that's a human rights topic. Aging was a human rights and still is. I'm not involved in healthcare, but healthcare is a human rights issue. Working within groups such as APA to further see the organization develop in terms of diversity and openness to different people and different experiences. For me, that's a human rights concern. I don't know if you've ever been to the APA building. You go to the executive conference room and there's the pictures of all the APA presidents. And it is a who's who of anybody who's anything. But you notice, well, there's Mary Calkins, okay. There's Margaret Washburn. And then there's this huge long expanse until you get to Janet Taylor Spence or Kenneth Clark, first African-American president of APA, or Martha Brunell, a variety of different individuals. But it is a wall of white men, principally. And it's hard to change institutional structures so that it is more open. And it's not just leadership, but it filters down into all levels of the organization. APA has done a lot of work with that. But I think there's still more work, in part looking back at the history and saying, here's what we did wrong, and how can we fix this? As opposed to, okay, that was just years ago. And so for me, human rights extends into teaching as a human rights issue. You know, everything relates to it.
Everything truly relates to it. Last year, we took a Lyft or an Uber from Tampa over to St. Pete Beach to have dinner at a favorite seafood restaurant. And we were not in that car, I don't think, more than 10 minutes before Linda and the driver were talking about genocide. And I still have no idea how it came up, but somehow it managed into the conversation. Now, generally, Garth, you and I have a lot of conversations, and I don't think we have ever talked about genocide. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yet with Linda, 5-10 minutes with somebody talking about genocide. Mm-hmm. We went to a San Francisco Giants baseball game last year when APA convention was in San Francisco. We were sitting next to a couple Giants fans, and I think it was before the 5th inning when Linda and the San Francisco Giants fans were talking about human trafficking. I went and got a hot dog.
And what's interesting is I didn't start out teaching about genocide or Holocaust, but I was teaching intro, and it was a social psych section, and I was using the Holocaust as an example. And I looked out at my classroom of these 18, 19-year-olds with some other non-traditional students, but particularly the traditional age students, and some of them had blank expressions on their face. And so I started, do you know what I'm talking about? And started asking some questions, and they didn't know much at all. So being the psychologist that I am, I put together a brief questionnaire, which is knowledge of the Holocaust, as well as 2 questions that, there were other things on, but particularly knowledge of the Holocaust, and one that on a scale of 1 to 7, do you think it's likely the Holocaust didn't happen? Agree, disagree. And do you think the Holocaust has been exaggerated? Agree, disagree. And I ended up giving out the questionnaire at my university as well as St. Louis University because I figured it would be a totally different population. Results were not different between the two. They really didn't know much at all. They really didn't. They knew the term. They knew that maybe some Jews had died, but also some Catholics, and that it was over in Europe somewhere, and the United States played a huge role in ending it, and which isn't true. And so they really didn't have much knowledge. They thought it happened, but they were also leaned towards, we think it's been exaggerated, which is a modern form of Holocaust denial. And so it was having an effect on them. And so I thought, I need to teach a course on the Holocaust. Now, being the kind of person I am, I couldn't just get out some books and teach a course on the Holocaust. I went and studied one summer at Yad Vashem, which is in Israel, which is the Holocaust Remembrance and Memorial. But they've got an educational program in the summer for teachers. And then I spent the next summer on a trip through Europe to various concentration camps with the Holocaust Education Foundation so that I would have the tools to be able to teach the class. And when I started teaching about the Holocaust, I thought, well, why am I not talking about Cambodia or, Rwanda? And then I realized that there were all these genocides. So how many, let me just give you some statistics. About 40 million people in the 20th century were killed as the result of war. How many individuals do you think were killed as a result of genocide? Now we know the Holocaust was 6 million Jews, Cambodia probably 1.5 million Cambodians, Armenian genocide another 1 to 1.5, 2 million. So how many people, so 40 million, how many people killed to genocide in the 20th century? So we're not even looking at the 21st century.
We've been subjected to anchoring.
Yep. Mm-hmm. This includes Rwanda.
Bosnia.
Bosnia.
Yep. It would not include Darfur.
Oh, well, that changes everything.
Well, it's probably creeping up towards 15, 20 then. 15?
I'm going to go higher. I'm going to go closer to 100.
You should go closer to 210 million. And does not include individuals during war times who were killed due to war. This is strictly genocide, people killed because of who they were. And it's one of the most underreported international crimes. I mean, domestic violence against women is the most underreported. But genocide, it's because it's often against indigenous populations. That we need the land. The first genocide of the 20th century, I'm not even going to subject it was the Herero in Namibia. And the Germans were colonizing, and the Herero were rebelling, and so, killed them all. And one of the reasons it is an effective tool, and it's done with impunity. Very few consequences for genocide.
Mm-hmm. What have you learned about? Well, what have you learned about genocide? What kind of takeaways do you?
Top 3.
Yeah, top 3.
Top 3. Cultures that have a history of genocide and tend to use violence as a way to solve problems are at greater risk for genocide. So Germany had committed a genocide previously with the Herero, so it put them at risk for the Holocaust. Situational facts, so that isn't enough by itself, but oftentimes it's when there's a crisis in a culture, and it can be an economic crisis, an economic downturn, political crises, where people have, it's an interruption in their expected view of their life course. I'm living in this culture. This is how I expect my life to be. And then something shifts. And it's not the people who are marginalized that actually cause a genocide. It's the people who have had lives of privilege, who all of a sudden look and go, wait, this isn't how it was supposed to be. Then you pair that with a leader who has strong authoritarian leanings, who then looks and says, these are the reasons that you're having problems, and that's what can lead to a genocide. But those leaders use all those social psychological principles to create that us-them divide. And what's frightening is if we look today around the world, we're seeing a rise around the world. It's not just in one place of right-wing authoritarianism, because there are people who this is not how it was supposed to be, or they can go online and see other people have it very different. How come my life isn't like that? It should be. And so, they join extremist groups.
So they're looking for a scapegoat, a reason.
They're looking for a scapegoat,
Yeah.
but they're also looking for someone that tells them it's not your fault. And you are valued, and here's what we can do to fight back.
Through Project Syllabus, Society for the Teaching of Psychology, teachpsych.org website, you have...
And what's that URL again?
That would be teachpsych.org. You have some syllabi that are
Yes.
part of Project Syllabus. And I don't remember the syllabi that you have on there. Do you remember?
Genocide, Holocaust, peace psychology, I'm not sure what else. But if people want to, I highly recommend going to that website. Tons of information on that website. But if you just type in Linda Woolf, and it's WOOLF on Google, and click on I'm feeling lucky, my webpage is one of the first things that pops up. And one of the things I decided when I was doing some of this stuff, because I knew there were other people, Irvin Staub has always been involved in courses related to teaching about genocide, and there are others around the country. But their materials weren't easily available. And I thought, no, so if somebody else decides they want to teach a course on genocide, they want to teach a course on ethics, whatever it may be, my syllabi are not just tucked behind a canvas, a learning platform wall, but if they go to that website, all my syllabi are available.
And if people email you?
I will respond. Although sometimes, I'm not sure why, but my emails go into some sort of cyberspace and I never see them, unless it's 6 months later when they just spontaneously appear and I don't know where they've been.
Well, I've had good luck with your emails.
That's
so,
good.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really cool to hear what you're passionate about and what you've made a career on. And I guess I'm wondering right now, with your background in psychology, has it always been a good fit with social justice? Has it always been, are there people who are doing, like when I think about social justice advocates, they don't usually come out of academia, right?
I don't know about that. I think it's one of those things that it's just, oftentimes people who do social justice don't know how to publicize themselves or their work very well. And so there's actually an organization called Psychologists for Social Responsibility that's been around for a long time. SPICY, and I can never remember, it's, Division 9 of APA, Society for the Study of Social Psych. We all call it SPICY because we can never remember the name of it. But there's whole divisions of social justice, which include, 35, which is women. And so it's that thread is there and people have been doing it. But again, I don't think it's always been publicized. What's interesting is I went to a session at the APA convention about 2 years ago, and it was on human rights and the task force that's working on human rights. And they were giving a report, and then a psychologist stood up at the end and said, psychology is a science, and I worry that we've gone too far from the science towards the human rights. And, we need to have that pendulum swing back to science. And my response was, and it was right at the end, so it was the last question of the day, but it came up in another session. And what I said was that issues of diversity, issues of human rights, ethics, they're fundamental. So they are the foundation of our discipline. And you can't have good science if you're not taking into account social justice and human rights. You cannot have good science if you're failing to take into account issues of diversity. And when we look at some of the horrific abuses of science, whether it's in Nuremberg or, the medical experiments done by the Japanese during World War II, or the Cold War experiments in the United States, or Tuskegee, we have cases where human rights was not a foundation of the science, and so it was faulty. And we can look at the whole range of science done on men in healthcare. And of course, this is going to apply to women just as well, and it doesn't. The physiology is different on some things. So if you fail to take those into account, you don't have good science. So it isn't a pendulum. That's a base issue that you then need to ground your science on.
I don't know if this is the right question, but when I think about, okay, I'm going to boil this down to intro psych, because do you teach intro psych?
I do.
Okay, so we all
I do. That's how I get
intro.
invited to teach, do the AP reading.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Of course. So how do you boil all this down in your intro psych course? Because in intro psych, we have this value of ethics, of diversity, so what do you... We all infuse our classes with what we're passionate about. How do you do this in your intro psych class?
I don't lecture straight from the textbook because I assume, and perhaps wrongly in some case, but I assume that they can buy and read the book on their own. I also don't try to cover every chapter in intro. And at the college level, I have that luxury. What I think they need in intro is a good, and Sue and I have talked about what are some of the basic core things that they need to have, and I think methods is one. The development of critical thinking, being able to evaluate information. And so my lectures often then draw on sort of those human rights. So when I teach about ethics in the section on research methods, and there's a few pages on ethics, it has informed consent. I talk about Tuskegee, and what went wrong. And the Nazi experimentation. And that draws them in. When I talk about sensation and perception, I bring in issues of changes in the eyes and the ears in older adults and how that impacts them and their well-being. So it's connecting those topics to things that they can relate to that are important, they're not probably dealing with, older eyes themselves, but they got grandparents. Or why their grandparent doesn't hear them right, particularly if they're a young girl, and their voices are, the teenage young women, and their voices are real high, and so sometimes half of what they say is lost. I say, don't shout at your grandparents, lower your voice a little bit, because what they're losing is that higher range of sounds. And so I try to develop those connections in all the topics we talk about. So it's not just here's memorize these terms and different things, but here's how it makes a difference. We get a lot of gaming students take an intro. Now, maybe it's the time slot that I teach that I get a lot of students in gaming, but how it is that learning principles shape those games and how it's useful for them. But what are the ramifications of that when they develop those games? And so, that's what I do.
Wow.
I've often thought about just putting together a web page of here's the different intro chapters and here's ways you can infuse some social justice and human rights things. It's on the agenda of things to do.
Sounds like an article.
Well, it could be an article. Absolutely.
Do you run into folks who share your passion in psychology? I mean, do you run into those folks at conferences who are just like you? And what's that like?
I don't know that I would wish anybody to be just like me. But there are people who are very passionate about what they do. Absolutely. And so some of my closest friends are not necessarily the people, in my town who I know and go to baseball games with, although I adore them. But people who I have developed connections with working on projects.
Okay.
Through the years. And, so the people I worked with when we were working on the actions against psychologist involvement in torture, some of those folks are going to be just parts of my life for the rest of my life. And the same related to some of the issues related to women.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of really good people out there. And did you know what psychologist, not from the science end, but what psychologist was going to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize but ended up not. Family received the call. He'd been nominated, but he had died just a few days before, and you have to be alive to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Who was it?
I don't know.
I don't want to look dumb again.
No.
Okay.
Carl Rogers.
Oh, I was going to say Carl Rogers.
No!
I couldn't say it.
You're a humanist. I mean, I totally believe. I totally believe you, Garth. I totally believe. I will give you credit for that. I will give you credit.
I wish I could tell you that was honest, but nobody's going to believe me.
Well, you know what? You have editing power.
Your reaction was too genuine.
Wait 1 second. Carl Rogers.
Absolutely.
Wow.
That is
my gosh,
absolutely
I can't believe
correct.
I knew that.
I can't believe you knew that either.
Yeah, he organized the Rust Peace Conferences, and so there are lots of famous psychologists who worked on these social justice issues.
Oh, that's
It's
cool.
just not what they're known for.
Is there anything else that we need to brag on about Linda here?
Brag on. So there were a handful of things that I want to know. I wish I had paper in front of me because I would have been writing them down.
Yeah.
I want to know how it is you decided, an acknowledged introvert, how you decided to do the AP reading.
Jane Hallinan.
Is that right?
Yep, 2 words. I would go to NITOP, the National Institute on the Teaching of Psychology. Great conference.
NITOP.org.
NITOP.org. It's January on St. Pete Beach, Florida. And it is also just a conference for teachers. And it was before STP was in the conference business. So it was sort of, the grandparent of teaching conferences. And she was always saying, why don't you go? And other people were just raving about it. And I kept thinking, why would anybody in their right mind want to sit and grade essays forever? And then I found out, I thought, okay, it's in Daytona Beach. I like the beach. So maybe I'll try it once. And I tried it. I liked it. Of course, it was moved out of St. Pete Beach to the infamous Daytona Beach. It was moved to the infamous hotel in Louisville.
The Gulf? No,
those were the good years. This was an old, I think it was a Holiday Inn.
It was a Holiday Inn.
Yeah, that was way far away from the convention, past constructions, and run down, boarded up buildings, and I think they tore it down a year or two later.
I think it spent a year the year after we left, if I understand the rumors correctly, the year after we left, it became a homeless shelter, and then the following year they turned it down.
Yeah,
they tore it down. Tore it down.
Yeah, and then it moved to Kansas City, which had great barbecue.
Yeah.
Oh, that was good.
Oh,
Kansas City was good.
Kansas City was good. Yep.
Yeah.
And then we went back to Louisville. Second Louisville was good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Second Louisville
it was.
good.
Yeah.
Tampa, not so.
So that's how it
not
goes.
as good as Louisville.
Yeah.
No.
So what I just heard then is that it was all because Jane Hallinan said to do it.
Well, Jane Hallinan got me involved. She is such a mentor to so many individuals. She really is an amazing human being. And I can remember calling her up once, just little quiet me, thinking, well, maybe I'm involved in Division 48, which is the Peace Division. I'm involved in Division 2, which is teaching. And I thought, maybe there could be some connection between the two. So I remember calling her and saying, I was wondering if there was a liaison between Division 2 and 48. She said, it's you.
That's so good.
Yeah, and so she just pulled me right in, and yeah, it was great.
Oh, that's wild.
I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about how amazing high school psychology teachers are.
I have such admiration and respect for high school teaching psychologists. High school teaching psychologists, teaching psychology.
No, that's right.
Okay.
High school teachers of
The
psychology.
people of high school teachers who teach the discipline of psychological science.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, an amazing group of human beings. They will know more about intro than I will ever know.
I completely agree with that.
And the commitment that they have to teaching the discipline, the commitment they have to building that base of individuals who know that psychology is a science. I am in awe every day. My job is so easy compared to what they do, and they do it with such grace and enthusiasm. Best people ever.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate so many things about you. One of the things I appreciate about you is that you are just like one of the most generous people that I have met in teaching of psychology. And even this week at the AP reading, I know that I as a table leader had the option to put you with. You had the option to be by yourself as your intro. That would be your happy place.
It really would.
You know, be by yourself. At the AP reading, readers are paired off together, and but when you get a table of 7 instead of 8, sometimes somebody gets to be by themselves. So I had the opportunity to work with Linda this week, and the opportunity to figure out what she might like as far as being by herself, and Sue, you helped me out with this. But what you said is, no, I want to help somebody who's a rookie.
Yeah.
I want to help mentor somebody through this process, and that thread is just all throughout your life. I really appreciate that about you. I have personally benefited from this part of you.
Thank you.
And it's been really meaningful to me, and I know it is to the reader who you are with this week, and probably hundreds of people who you've touched in your life, the people at the baseball games or whatever else. So thanks for being an inspiration to so many of us.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I think of it as giving so much. I think of it as teaching.
Yeah.
And I just tend to take that everywhere. So whether it's working with, we call them acorns, the new AP readers, or I was talking to somebody at lunch who was in language, and she was saying how she didn't think she wanted to ever teach in a university because she have to do publishing. And I said, I don't see it so much as publishing. I see it as just another form of teaching, except you can reach, as opposed to 25 or 300 or how many students you have in your classroom, you can reach potentially thousands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what publishing is. It should be about teaching.
Yeah. Sue, what's your favorite thing about Linda? Or a favorite thing? What's a favorite thing?
A favorite thing?
Because you've been roommates together at all these conferences and the reading for so many years. You guys know each other so well. Anything that you want to just heap praise on, Linda, about?
No, I got a whole bunch of complaints.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. Can you give us your top 3? No, I know that you think very highly of her.
Oh, I absolutely do.
Yeah, and that's very clear to me.
Absolutely.
Just even before I knew who she was.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you did. So I'll bail you out of putting you on the spot.
Well, I have
I
not
appreciate that.
harmed
Yeah.
her in her sleep. I think that's probably the primary criteria.
Okay, we'll go ahead and put this on the recording.
Yeah.
So,
Or we'll edit it.
or we'll edit it.
Yeah.
Either
whatever.
way.
Yeah.
Either way. So Linda and I have been rooming together we're coming up on 13 years now, give or take, in both at the AP reading and at NITOP and at APA convention. And I only learned, it was a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago,
About 3 years ago.
that I learned how it is which bed in the hotel room I got. I didn't realize.
Because she couldn't figure it out.
I could not figure it out.
Why do you always show up first, or?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, but if I chose the wrong bed, I get kicked out of it.
Yeah. She has to move.
And I didn't know what the pattern was. I never discovered the pattern, which probably says more about my intelligence than anything else. But a few years ago, she revealed what the pattern was. I always get the bed by the door. Now, do you know why I get the bed by the door?
So that if a murderer comes in, you get murdered first?
That is exactly
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
I have a chance to scurry past and flee.
I'm bait.
Well,
Yeah. But also, if I go to a restaurant, I never sit with my back to the door.
Which means my back is always to the door.
Yep.
well, it's funny, though, because you look at exits, too, which is, you're a pretty attentive person. I
I'm
think we've talked
attentive,
about
but
that.
apparently when we sit at restaurants, I don't get a choice as to which seat I'm in.
So maybe Linda isn't so kind, nice, after all. Maybe.
I think Linda is very kind and nice. I think Linda is very kind and nice to complete strangers. I think very kind and nice to up-and-coming teachers of psychology.
And pets.
And pets and dogs.
Rats.
And cats. Very kind and nice to them. But when it comes to long-term friends, we're sacrificial.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think it's so much that. I think anybody who studies genocide, terrorism, war, trafficking, whatever, it leaves an impact on you because a lot of people can't do it. And they say it's because, how can you look at all this horrible stuff all the time? Doesn't it depress you? And it can. I mean, so I know among genocide scholars there have been some notable ones who've committed suicide because it's just a heavy burden. And my theory is if I can sort of look over that abyss into the darkness and survive and teach it to help, others do better and help prevent things in the future, it's well worth it. But it does come at a cost, because you don't always look at humanity the same way as if you only studied the positive, the unicorns and rainbows. So it does leave its mark.
And I will say, even though it's a beautiful sentiment to end on, and you're encouraged to close the recording at that point, but I would say that I'm happy to do my small part and take the bed by the door.
And hopefully no one will ever break in. And I really probably would try to save you as best I could. As
You're
I
only saying
hit them
that
with a pillow.
You're saying that you're saying that for the purpose of the recording. I don't really believe it.
Actually, I have seen the fierce side of me come out when people have said or done things to my students that I haven't liked. I've stood up to administration on occasion, or colleagues, or pets.
Yep.
So there is a side of me that I don't encourage necessarily, but it does come out.
I think she'll come through for you.
I believe that. So. I believe that. I don't intend to ever find out. That's my plan.
You know what? Make sure you put that extra lock.
Always do. I always do.
And see, I don't even think to do it, because she does it. So.
Oh my gosh.
Well, of course I'm going to do it, because I get the bed next to the door.
Well, Sue, thank you for co-hosting this. This was fun.
This was fun.
This was delightful.
And Linda, thanks for
much.
doing that. I'm glad it was. And
let me give a shout out to both of you for all your work you do with STP and teaching. It's just amazing, and you do so much as well. But can you say a little bit about shared space? Because I have such a respect for you and the work that you do.
You're so kind. Yeah. So, and what I'll just say is one of the things that I really appreciate about Linda is that she nominated me for an APA presidential citation last year.
Which Garth got.
Which I got.
Yes, and
a year ago, by the way.
Yes, I know. I remember catching you up at the top of the elevator.
That's right.
Or the escalator, yeah.
What's so interesting to me is who would ever have thought about that, except that when you saw that APA was doing this initiative, and it's an ongoing initiative for citizen psychologists, so that's pretty cool, but that you would start churning about who could I nominate for that. So, yeah.
It wasn't hard for her.
No.
It was like, oh, they're doing this. Bam, Garth.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
it wasn't hard.
Yeah. Well, it was an honor, and it was really good for our organization.
Oh, good.
We're about to have a benefit dinner, actually, and one of the things that our MC is going to say at the beginning is how APA has recognized the work that Shared Space for All is doing. It's big. It's big for our donors to know that there are these other organizations who are getting on board, because nonprofit work is stupid hard.
And for those who don't know what Shared Space is,
yeah. So real quick, there are regions of Thailand. There are regions in Thailand, the poorest regions of Thailand, where women and men actually will drop out of school, where they will move to the cities for more lucrative employment so that they can send money back to their families. And they will end up getting filtered into prostitution. And Thailand has a really thriving sex industry. And so we work on the prevention side. We work with young girls and boys after school program to try to keep them in school. So we work with them from 6 to 18. And now actually beyond, because we're starting to do scholarships for college for our 4 kids this year who graduated from high school, and we'll send them to college. And so we just try to give them an alternative future. It's prevention work. It's hard work. We have an amazing team on the ground in Thailand, and we do the fundraising on this side of things. So sharedspaceforall.org, and you can learn more about us there. So thanks again for that.
Yeah, and there's a Jewish saying, and I'll probably mangle it, but it's something along the lines of, if you've saved one life, it's as if you've saved the entire world. And so it's hard work, but for those 4 kids and all of those others, it's the entire world to them and the generations that follow.
Well, good. Well, it's people like you who keep us going, because sometimes you need that pat on the back, or that acknowledgement that what you're doing is important. Yeah. And so that has been really meaningful to me personally, to us as an organization. So thank you. Thank you. And this was so fun to do with you guys.
This was fun.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's it from Tampa for now. And until next time.